I stood on my childhood porch clutching a tin of gingerbread when my mother opened the door and said, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong house." Her words didn't land at first. I stared at her, the woman who'd braided my hair before every recital, who used to hum carols while baking in this very kitchen. She was dressed impeccably in a cranberry velvet gown, a glass of wine poised in one manicured hand. Her eyes didn't soften, not even a flicker of recognition. "Mom?" I managed, my breath hitching against the cold air. "I'm sorry," she said again, more firmly this time. "We're hosting a private event. Please leave before I call someone." Laughter spilled from the grand hall behind her. The sound used to make me feel safe. Now it was a wall of ice. I blinked hard, searching for any trace of humanity in her face. Nothing. Behind her, just past her shoulder, I caught a glimpse of Sabrina, my younger sister. Her eyes met mine for a split second before she turned away, disappearing behind a curtain. No words, no protest, just silent retreat. I took a step back, my boots crunching in the snow. The tin in my hands trembled slightly. I had spent the entire morning baking those cookies. Grandpa Edward's recipe. Gingerbread with a hint of cardamom. He'd always said mine were better than anyone's. "You've got his hands." He would smile. Steady patient, like an architect of flavor. The porch light buzzed. It cast a harsh yellow glow on the falling snow and made the scene feel unreal, like I'd stepped into the wrong timeline, like someone had rewritten my life and forgotten to tell me. "I'm your daughter," I whispered. "Elena." My mother's smile turned brittle. "There's no one by that name here. Good night." She shut the door. Not slammed, just closed. Decisively. And just like that, I was standing in the snow outside the house I grew up in, holding cookies no one wanted. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I turned and walked back to my car, footsteps slow, each one erasing a memory. The Christmases we spent decorating that porch with garlands. The way my father used to lift me onto his shoulders to place the angel on the tree. The sound of my sister's giggle echoing down the hallway. Last year, we were all here singing carols. Something had shifted, and I wasn't told. I opened the car door, sat down, and finally let my hands fall into my lap. The tin made a soft clang against my knees. I felt hollow, confused, and then angry. Not loud, raging anger. The kind that burns cold and silent like frostbite. I reached into my coat pocket for my phone just to ground myself when I noticed the blinking notification. One new email, time-stamped for exactly 7:15 p.m., December 24th, from Edward Monroe. Subject, for Elena. My breath caught. Grandpa had passed away in August, quietly, peacefully. He'd left behind no drama, no arguments, just a will, a family estate, and his usual cryptic wisdom. Hands shaking, I tapped the email open. "If you're reading this, they've begun." That was it. One sentence. No signature. No preamble. My heart stuttered. I looked up at the house. At the glow in the windows, the silhouettes of people laughing inside. My family. My mother. My sister. Celebrating. Pretending I didn't exist. They'd begun what? A tremor of realization moved through me. This wasn't just a cruel moment. It was part of something bigger. Deliberate. I closed the email, stared at my reflection in the dark screen, and whispered to the cold glass, "What did you know, Grandpa?" The gingerbread tin sat between us like a forgotten offering. Snowflakes melted on the windshield, distorting the view of the estate. I didn't start the car. Not yet. Something had started. Something I wasn't meant to stop, but I could finish it. She receives a scheduled email from her late grandfather. "If you're reading this, they've begun." I clicked the email, hands trembling. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. "Don't trust the ones who smile too easily." The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in my apartment, casting long, soft shadows across the hardwood floor. It was early Christmas morning. No music, No gifts. Just the low hum of the radiator and the ache in my chest. The cheap tinsel I'd taped to the windowsill curled slightly from the draft. I'd tried, half-heartedly, to pretend the holidays still meant something. But now, I knew the truth. They didn't. Not without him. The email opened to reveal an attached video file and a short note. For Elena. Only you. I hesitated for a breath, then clicked. Edward's face appeared, older than I remembered from last Christmas, but no less sharp. His white hair was combed neatly back, his eyes still kind, but tinged with that quiet fire he never showed anyone but me. He sat in the study of the estate, the old grandfather clock ticking faintly behind him. If you're seeing this, it means what I feared has already begun, he said. His voice was clear, deliberate. They've cut you out, haven't they? Your mother, your sister, maybe even the rest. I wish I could say I was surprised. I leaned closer, heart pounding. I tried to protect you, he continued. But you know your mother. Diana was always good at hiding knives behind those polished smiles. And Sabrina? She learned too well. I couldn't breathe. You were the only one who never looked at me like I was just a vault. That's why I'm telling you now. There's a second will, a copy. I couldn't leave it in the house. They would have found it. But I hid it in plain sight, where only someone with your memory would look. He paused, lips twitching into a faint smile. Remember Christmas morning when you were 7? Where you found the puppy I never admitted came from me? Start there. The screen froze, then faded to black. I stared at the laptop, my mind racing. He was right. I had found the puppy that year in a hollow under the bench in the east greenhouse, wrapped in a red blanket, wagging its tiny tail. I never knew who had put it there. Mom had claimed it was a gift from a family friend, and we'd only had the pup for 2 weeks before it was sent away to a farm. I never forgot. Hidden in plain sight, I whispered. Greenhouse. I grabbed a notebook from the coffee table and started scribbling. Edward had died in late February, just 2 months after last Christmas. That meant he'd had time to plan this, record the message, arrange everything. He'd suspected what was coming. I flipped through the notebook, trying to line up the sequence of events. The memorial had been quiet. Too quiet. I'd felt like a guest, not family. Mom had insisted on handling the legal affairs alone. Said it was better that way. At the time, I was too numb with grief to argue. Now, I realized that was their window. My phone buzzed beside the laptop. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Elena? A woman's voice said. Yes? It's Talia Carr. I worked with your grandfather. I remembered her. A sharp, quiet attorney with a hawk's gaze who used to handle estate documents. She always seemed like she was 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Even as a child, I'd been a little intimidated. Did you see the news about your family? She asked. Her voice clipped. What news? I figured not. They didn't exactly shout it from the rooftops. There was a pause. I heard typing on her end. Then she sent me a link. I clicked. The headline hit like a brick. Monroe Foundation announces board restructuring. Diana Monroe takes full executive control. My name was nowhere. Not in the article, not in the board list, not even a passing mention. They erased me, I said flatly. They've been planning this for months, Talia said. I wasn't supposed to know, but Edward told me things. Quietly. I have something he left with me. I didn't think I'd ever need to pass it along, but now... Her voice dropped an octave. We need to meet. There's something I kept after Edward passed. I think it belongs to you. Talia slides a velvet pouch across the table. Inside was an old silver watch, and a USB drive taped beneath its lid. The weight of the pouch felt strangely heavy in my hand, as if it carried not just metal but memory. The watch gleamed faintly under the soft lighting of the cafe, its surface worn smooth by time and touch. I turned it over, breath caught in my throat. There it was. My initials, EM, faintly etched into the back. Grandpa had given it to me when I turned 18. I used to wear it every day until it mysteriously vanished after his funeral. Talia sipped her coffee, watching me. He gave it to me a few days before he passed, she said. Said I'd know when to hand it over. I peeled the USB drive from the underside of the lid, careful not to damage the old felt lining. A part of me still hoped this was a gesture of comfort, a relic, a keepsake. But something in Talia's eyes said otherwise. We sat in a quiet corner booth of a small cafe in Boston's South End. It was the day after Christmas, and while the world outside trudged through post-holiday sales and leftover cheer, I felt suspended in some alternate timeline, one where love turned cold and truths were buried. "Do you have your laptop?" she asked. I nodded, pulling it from my tote bag and booting it up. The screen cast a pale glow over our corner. Talia leaned in as I inserted the USB and opened the only file. VIDEM onro. Hold for Elena.mp4. I clicked. The video opened with Edward seated in a hospital room. Not sterile or depressing, but quiet, warmly lit. A book resting on the table beside him. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, but his voice was strong. "This message is for my granddaughter, Elena Monroe," he began. "If you're watching this, I didn't get the chance to tell you in person, but know this. You are the person I trust most in this world." I swallowed hard. Talia said nothing. "I've named you as my primary heir, not just of my personal estate, but of the Monroe Foundation itself. You're the only one I believe will carry its values forward." His eyes glinted, stern but proud. "I know your mother and sister won't understand. They'll resist. They've been preparing for this moment in their own way. But I have safeguards. The lawyers will receive copies, and you'll know where to look if something seems off." Then, suddenly, the video flickered. It jumped frames, skipping audio. Edward's image fragmented, his face distorting for a second before freezing. The screen went black. I waited, hoping it would resume. It didn't. I opened the file directory. Only that one video. No duplicates, no backup. "Is that the whole thing?" I asked. "It's all he gave me," Talia said. "It was supposed to be longer, I think. I always wondered if someone got to the file before I could. But the signature, the legal declaration, none of it's there." "I know." I sat back, heart pounding. He said the lawyers would receive copies, but there was no mention of me in the will they read aloud at the estate. None. They said everything was left to Diana, and Sabrina was named Foundation co-director. Talia's mouth tightened. "That's not what he wanted. I was there when he spoke to his original estate attorney, Norman Talbot. He was adamant about protecting you." "Then where's the version he signed? The real one?" She shook her head. "That's what I've been trying to figure out." A few clicks later, I checked the file's metadata, something Edward had taught me to do back when he insisted I learn basic digital forensics. Creation date, February 15th, 3 days before he died. 3 days after the official will had supposedly been finalized and filed. My hands went cold. If he recorded this after the final will, then that will wasn't the final one, I whispered. Talia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "That's not the only problem." "What do you mean?" "The signature on the public will—" She paused. It didn't match his handwriting. Not entirely. At the time, I thought it was just his illness. But now? I looked up at her. "If this is real," she said slowly, deliberately, "someone went to great lengths to erase you, including forging documents." I didn't expect my name to be missing from the will. I expected it to be rewritten, but it wasn't even mentioned. The chill in the law office wasn't from the weather outside. The rain might have soaked my coat and frizzed my hair, but the cold I felt seeped deeper, into bone, into memory. I sat across from Marshall Green, my grandfather's longtime legal counsel, surrounded by sterile walls and glass shelves lined with untouched books. He smiled, a polite curve of the lips that never reached his eyes. "So, what brings you in today, Elena?" I clutched my umbrella like a sword and offered a practiced smile. "I've just been going through some of Grandpa's things. I found an old letter that mentioned his estate planning. I was wondering if I could take a look at the official documents, for clarity." Talia sat silently to my left, pretending to check her phone. But I saw how her eyes flicked up with each movement Marshall made. Marshall shifted slightly in his chair. "Everything was filed and settled a while ago. Your mother and sister have been managing things responsibly." "I'm sure," I said evenly. "Still, it would help to see the documents, just for peace of mind." He hesitated. "I suppose it can't hurt." He stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder stamped with the Monroe family crest. I recognized it immediately. It was the same folder I'd seen in Edward's study for years, but something about it looked newer now. Cleaner. Marshall returned and slid the will across the desk. "This is the version filed with the court." I opened the folder slowly. The paper was crisp, unblemished. The signatures were neat, but familiar in an eerie way. I flipped page after page, my stomach tightening. There was no mention of me. Not in the estate, not in the foundation, not in any trusts. Talia leaned closer, pointing discreetly. "This looks like a different draft than the one he showed us in 2021. She whispered. Marshall caught the motion and narrowed his eyes. "Everything you see here is accurate and legally binding." "Can I take a copy?" I asked. He hesitated again. "Of course." He tapped a few keys and printed a duplicate. As he handed it to me, I noticed the corner of the page bore a reference ID. It looked off. Normally, Monroe legal documents followed a very specific format. This one didn't. Talia took the copy and made a show of folding it neatly. But I saw her phone already in her lap, discreetly snapping a picture of the code. "I appreciate this," I said, standing. "It helps to see it all laid out." "Of course," Marshall replied, his smile flickering. "Happy to help." We left the office and stepped into the rain. I didn't speak until we were 2 blocks away, tucked under an awning near a coffee shop. Talia handed me her phone. "This registry code doesn't match anything in the probate system. I just searched the court database." And get this, the signature page? It was filed 2 days after Edward's death. I froze. "What?" She nodded. "It's a legal impossibility. No one can sign posthumously. The system only logs dates on official filing. That signature page wasn't uploaded until January 17th. He passed on the 15th. I pulled the watch from my coat pocket, the one Edward had given me, the one Talia had returned just 2 days ago, and held it tightly in my fist. "They wanted it buried," I said. "They wanted me erased so badly they forged his will." Talia nodded slowly. "There's more. That filing didn't come from the normal firm either. It was pushed through by an offshoot. Someone working under a shell name." A dull roar built in my ears as realizations settled like frost across my chest. This wasn't just an oversight. This was a deliberate, orchestrated betrayal. I glanced down at the copy in my hands, then back at Talia. She looked at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer right away. I was too busy replaying every conversation with my mother. Every polite smile from Sabrina. Every hollow condolence at the funeral. I exhaled slowly. Then I whispered, "They filed a forged will after he died." "Mr. Linwood, do you remember what Edward told you that night?" He stared at the fire. "More than you think." The heat from the fireplace wrapped around us like a heavy wool blanket, but it did little to ease the tightness in my chest. I sat across from the man who had served my grandfather faithfully for more than 3 decades. His wrinkled hands rested calmly on the arms of his chair, and the orange glow flickered across his lined face, deepening the creases etched by years of silence. Talia had insisted on driving. The road out to Linwood's countryside home was long and winding, blanketed in snow. Each mile an echo of a past I was only now realizing had been carefully redacted from my life. As she waited in the car, I sat facing the only person left who might confirm what Edward had meant for me, before they erased it all. "More than you think," he repeated, voice gravelly with age, eyes unmoving from the flames. Edward was a man who planned everything, and he knew they'd try something. I leaned forward slightly, heart thudding. "Who, Mr. Linwood?" He finally turned to look at me, eyes clear and solemn. "Your mother, and your sister. They came sniffing around even before he passed. Especially Diana. She had keys to the study before she had tears in her eyes." I swallowed hard, recalling the cold indifference in Diana's voice when she turned me away from the house. "There was an envelope," he said slowly. "A second one. Edward gave it to me 3 days before the end. Told me not to trust the lawyers, not to let Diana or Sabrina near it. He said if anything happened to him unexpectedly, it was for you." My breath caught. "What happened to it?" He looked down at his hands. I hid it, behind the books in the West study, just like he asked. But the day after he passed, Diana came by. She insisted on clearing things. I told her to leave, but she smiled that smile of hers and said, "Dad would want me to handle this." When she left, the envelope was gone. A cold fury tightened in my gut. "Did you see her take it?" "Number. But I know it was her." He tapped his temple with a shaking finger. Edward's handwriting was on the seal. I never forget that. And it was gone. I exhaled shakily, the beginnings of despair starting to creep in again. "But," Linwood added, reaching into the side drawer of a small desk, "I didn't just trust paper." He pulled out a small recorder, the kind people used for dictation. "He left me this. Told me to listen only if I suspected foul play." He pressed a button. The static crackled, then a voice, his voice, filled the room. "My daughter will not win through deceit. Elena is the rightful one. I've made it clear in the revised will. This isn't about love. It's about truth." I felt my eyes sting. It wasn't just hearing his voice again. It was the clarity, the conviction, the deliberate naming of me as the heir. Mr. Linwood turned off the recorder and held it in his palm, almost reverently. He trusted me to protect this, and I have. But now, he looked at me, gaze sharpening. "I'll testify. I'll stand up and say it, even if they come for me." A stunned silence hung in the air. "But there's one condition," he continued. "I deliver it myself, in court. No one else touches it before then." I nodded, grateful. "Of course. Whatever you need." He leaned back, sighing deeply. "It won't be easy. She's already suspicious. Diana came to see me last week." My stomach dropped. "What did she want?" "She brought wine, asked questions, too friendly. She's watching Elena. She knows I have something, and she won't stop until she buries it." The fire snapped loudly, as if punctuating his warning. Outside, snow began falling again, gently coating the world in white. But in here, I felt the storm building, and it wasn't from the weather. Talia traced her finger along the signature. This was filed posthumously. That alone could burn them in court. The words hung in the room, slicing through the silence like a blade. Talia leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp with calculation, the forged will spread open on the desk between us. Around her, her home office looked like a storm had passed through. Legal pads scribbled with notes, file folders spilling out onto the floor, sticky tabs clinging to law books stacked precariously. It was the battlefield of someone preparing for war. I stared at the document. That signature. So neat. Too neat. It wasn't just the wrong date. It was impossibly tidy for someone who'd been in a hospital bed, barely able to lift a glass of water. "You're telling me this was filed after he died?" I asked, barely keeping the tremor out of my voice. Talia nodded. The filing date with probate is 2 days after his death certificate. Either he rose from the grave with a pen, or someone had a very well-timed forgery waiting. She reached for her tablet and tapped the screen. Watch this. The Zoom window opened. Daniel Ruiz's face appeared, tired but alert, framed by rows of law books in his own office. Elena. He greeted me with a tight smile. Talia looped me in. I had my paralegal pull Edward Monroe's full hospital timeline. He held up a chart. Admitted December 12th, conscious until December 17th, died December 20th. The will was filed December 22nd. My blood ran cold. So he couldn't have signed it on the 21st? Exactly, Daniel said grimly. We need to subpoena the hospital records and match them to the court filing. If we can show Edward was medically incapable or already deceased at the time of the signature, we're not just talking about invalidation. We're talking felony forgery. Talia's fingers drummed a rhythm on the desk, which gives us leverage. I looked between them. So what's next? Daniel leaned forward. You file a formal petition to the probate court requesting a comprehensive review of the will, citing possible fraud and coercion. Once approved, we'll get access to all filing documents, including digital records. And the video from the USB? I asked. Would that help? If we can authenticate it, Daniel said, it'll support Edward's original intent. But without his signature on that version, it's just a breadcrumb. We need more. Talia turned her laptop toward me. Let's start the filing tonight. I'll prep the affidavit for Linwood. His voice memo adds weight, especially since Diana tried to silence him. At the mention of Diana, something shifted in me. Anger, resolve. The cold humiliation on Christmas Eve was nothing compared to this. A calculated effort to erase me, steal from me, rewrite the truth. And I had enough of being silent. While Talia drafted the initial petition, I combed through the estate papers. One folder, nearly overlooked, held a copy of the notary's certification for the revised will. I stared at the emblem on the bottom right corner. Something was off. Talia, I said slowly, holding the page up. Does this seal look different to you? She came around and squinted. Then her eyes widened. This isn't Vermont's seal. What? This notary stamp. It's from Massachusetts. Different certification pattern. Look here. Vermont notaries use a vertical emblem. This is horizontal. But the will was supposedly signed in Vermont. Exactly. She spun around and pulled an official registry from the state website. There's no registered notary under this name in Vermont during the month of December. This seal is from out of state. That makes it inadmissible. I could feel the momentum shift. The pieces were falling into place. Not fast, but deliberately. Daniel cleared his throat on Zoom. Elena, brace yourself. I just got a ping. What is it? They just hired Mitchell and Holt. Talia froze. Her fingers curled into fists. I frowned. Who? Daniel's voice was clipped. Mitchell and Holt is a firm that specializes in silencing problems. Think, tactical lawsuits, procedural delays, dragging things out until people give up. They don't play fair. They play to exhaust. My heart pounded. Daniel continued. Whatever you're planning next, you need to be twice as ready. They'll come after everything. Your credibility, your motives, even your sanity if they have to. I looked at Talia. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes locked onto mine. Then we'd better give them a reason to regret ever starting this. Sabrina's hands shook as she tore the debt notice in two, but the guilt clung tighter than the interest rate. The paper split with a sound far too loud for her quiet townhouse. She stared down at the jagged edges, heart pounding, as if the act of destruction might somehow erase the 5-figure number glaring back at her. But it didn't. Her credit card statement was still unpaid, her business loan still delinquent, and the mortgage, God, the mortgage. Outside, January winds howled through the alley behind her row of townhouses. The only light in the room came from the flickering television, where muted images of a courtroom drama played out. She wasn't really watching. Her eyes kept drifting back to her phone. Voicemail. One new message. From Diana. She didn't want to press play, but her thumb moved anyway. Darling. Diana's voice cooed with that manufactured warmth. I know this month has been difficult. The holidays always are, especially without him. But I can help. I've already taken care of one creditor. Just imagine what I could do for the rest. There was a pause, then. All I need is your cooperation at the hearing. Say Elena pressured Edward. Say she convinced him he was being betrayed. The board will believe you. You were always his favorite. Click. Sabrina's thumb hovered over the delete button, but she didn't press it. Not yet. She wrapped her arms around herself, retreating to the couch like a child seeking comfort. Her living room was cold, not from the temperature, but from the absence of anything warm. The decorations from Christmas still lingered. Half-deflated tinsel, a tree that had browned at the edges, a single unopened gift that she had bought for herself and never unwrapped. A chime broke the silence. New voicemail. From Elena. She hesitated, then played it. Hey, Sabs. I know things are weird. I'm not calling about court. I miss the real you. The one who made me coffee when I had panic attacks before school. The one who stole Dad's cigars and blamed it on the neighbor kid. I miss you. Not your silence. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know I love you. The message ended. And for a moment, everything froze. The real her. Sabrina blinked hard, the words hitting somewhere deep beneath the guilt and the debt and the echo of Diana's manipulation. The real her hadn't pawned a family heirloom. The real her hadn't taken hush money from their mother. The real her had defended Elena, even when Edward clearly favored her more. The watch. She clenched her fists. She could still remember the feel of it in her palm, the way it had ticked quietly like it held secrets. Edward had pressed it into her hand after Elena left for college. Give this to her when the time's right, he had said. She'll need to remember. But the watch had vanished the week he died. Sabrina had needed money. She told herself it was just a trinket. She never expected Edward to actually name Elena in anything important. And when Diana took over the estate, offering Sabrina guidance and support, it all felt so inevitable. She didn't mean to betray her sister, not completely. Her fingers hovered over her phone again. Diana had called again 5 minutes ago. Sabrina didn't need to listen. She already knew the script. Elena, however, had called once. Just once. She walked to the window and pulled the curtains aside. Snow had begun to fall. Slow, soft flakes catching in the streetlights like shards of something too delicate to last. It reminded her of Vermont, of Christmases long before the politics and the money and the bitterness. She used to be someone else. And now? Now she was being asked to destroy the one person who still believed that version of her existed. The phone buzzed again. An automated text from her bank. Loan overdue. Final warning. She closed her eyes. Then she sat down and opened her laptop. The affidavit form Diana had sent weeks ago was still there. Blank. Waiting. And below it, the draft statement Diana had helped her write. A tidy narrative of manipulation, coercion, Elena pressuring Edward in his final days. It would take less than 5 minutes to sign and send it. It would take a lifetime to forgive herself. Her cursor blinked on the screen. Her hand moved. She typed. She saved. And then she pressed send. When it was over, she picked up her phone. There was Elena's voicemail again, waiting. She listened one more time, then deleted it. A single tear fell. I suggest we remove her name permanently from all documents, Diana said. Her voice didn't even tremble. The words dropped into the boardroom like a blade. Cold, clean, final. Around the gleaming oval table, 10 board members of the Langston Foundation turned their heads in unison. Some raised brows, others exchanged glances, but none spoke. The winter light spilled through the massive glass windows behind Diana's seat, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Diana leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, her expression the picture of composed confidence. Her navy suit was sharp, her makeup meticulous. She was every inch the chairwoman her father had always groomed her to be. Her involvement has lapsed, Diana continued, her voice silk over steel. Her whereabouts are unknown. She hasn't attended a meeting in over 2 years, and frankly, we have no legal obligation to retain her name on our charter. A few murmurs stirred the air. Mr. Sanderson, the Foundation's legal advisor, adjusted his glasses, but said nothing. Beside him, Mrs. Kipling tapped a pen against her notepad, frowning slightly. Still, no one dared interrupt Diana Monroe in full execution mode. She reached for a prepared document, an official amendment to the Foundation's charter, and placed it squarely in front of her. With your approval, this will be filed first thing Monday. A beat passed. Then the double doors at the far end of the room swung open. Every head turned. Elena Monroe stepped into the boardroom, her heels echoing against the stone floor, her face unreadable. She wore black, sleek and understated, but it was her calm gaze that turned the temperature of the room. Behind her stood Mr. Linwood, Edward Monroe's longtime housekeeper and confidant. He looked strangely out of place in his threadbare coat and walking cane, but there was purpose in his step. He carried a leather folder tucked under one arm. Diana's smile barely faltered. "Elena," she said lightly. "What a surprise. I thought you were still unavailable." "Turns out," Elena replied, walking to the nearest empty seat. "I became available just in time." The board shifted, some straightening, others pretending to review their notes. The tension, once only a ripple beneath Diana's dominance, now pulsed in plain sight. Linwood stepped forward and, without a word, handed each board member a sealed envelope. Inside each one was a photocopy of a handwritten note, Edward's unmistakable scrawl across thick parchment. No letterhead, no signature, but the message was clear. To my board of trustees, should anything befall me suddenly, be advised. My granddaughter, Elena Monroe, is to inherit my voting shares and Foundation authority in full. If this statement is not among the final documents, consider this my personal addendum. Edward M. Silence. Mr. Sanderson opened his envelope slowly, read twice, then looked up at Diana. "Did this document pass through the estate filings?" Diana's jaw tensed, but she offered only a measured response. "There were many drafts, some incomplete. My father was unwell. We followed the signed legal version submitted through probate." "That document is dated 2 weeks before he died," Mrs. Kipling said, squinting at the page. "And it matches his handwriting." Diana offered a small, rehearsed chuckle. "You all know how sentimental my father was. He wrote dozens of notes, poems, letters, napkin doodles. This is just another." "But what if it's not?" The voice came from Dr. Felix Greer, a soft-spoken trustee with a reputation for impartiality. He looked directly at Diana. "If even 10% of this is true, we have a duty to investigate." A pause stretched. Diana slowly folded her hands, then smiled. Tight, predatory. "Then let the games begin." Elena Monroe emotionally abused her grandfather in his final weeks. The article reads. My stomach turned. The words stared back at me from the screen, bold and black against the sterile white background. They didn't just sting. They burned. My phone buzzed violently on the table, as if the world outside my apartment was pounding on the walls, trying to get in. The notifications were endless. Texts from former colleagues, missed calls from unknown numbers, emails titled "Response Needed," or worse, termination notice. I reached for my coffee but found it had gone cold. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled past the headline, down the article. Anonymous sources close to the Monroe family alleged that Elena Monroe manipulated her grandfather in his final weeks, exploiting his frailty to influence estate decisions. These claims come amid a brewing dispute over Monroe Foundation leadership and assets. They even embedded an old photo, me and Edward in his study. But the angle, the shadows, they made him look tired, fragile, like I was the predator. Jesus, I whispered. My chest tightened. The article had dropped at 6:04 a.m. By now, it had spread across all the major business aggregators. My freelance consulting contract with Clarion Energy was the first casualty. The email came in at 7:12 a.m. We regret to inform you that due to recent developments and reputational concerns, our board has elected to pause all collaboration. I didn't even read the rest. The phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. This time, Daniel. Pick up, I muttered. Please just, I answered. Daniel? His voice was calm but firm. I saw it. You okay? Number. They're saying I abused him, Daniel. My grandfather. They have no legal grounding, he said. But that won't stop public perception. This isn't about courtrooms anymore. It's a war of optics now. I pressed the phone to my ear harder. They'll believe it. Everyone will. He paused. You need proof. Not outrage. Not reaction. Hard proof that contradicts their narrative. Do you have anything that shows he was of sound mind? Anything from those final days? My eyes drifted to the cluttered drawer under my desk. I remembered backing up old photos from my phone there, the night after the funeral, unable to sleep. I dropped the call with Daniel and yanked the drawer open. A cloud of receipts, chargers, and flash drives tumbled out. I plugged in the external drive, hands moving faster than my thoughts. Folder. Hospital week, December. I clicked. Inside, dozens of blurry shots. Flowers, a tray of pudding. Then one image stopped me. Edward sat in his favorite burgundy cardigan, his face bright and animated, smiling directly at the camera. One hand rested on a leather folder. The other held a pen mid-signature. My heart thudded. I opened the image properties. Taken. January 17th, 9:42 a.m. The same date the smear article claimed he had suffered a cognitive decline severe enough to question all legal judgment. I closed my eyes. The tremble in my hands was gone, replaced by fire. They had forged documents, rewritten history, and now tried to bury me under shame. But the metadata didn't lie. Metadata reveals photo taken the same day as the alleged mental breakdown in the smear article. I've seen that handwriting before, Talia whispered, her finger tracing the faded margin notes. He hid the real will, in his own journals. We were deep inside Edward's private library, the smell of aged leather and cedar thick in the air. The shelves towered above us, lined with books I used to dust as a child. I hadn't stepped foot in this room since before his funeral. Now, with Linwood's discreet key and quiet nod, I stood at the threshold of something bigger than either of us could have imagined. We had been searching for over an hour. Talia flipping through his tax ledgers, I through the stack of journals Edward never let anyone touch. He wrote every morning, sitting by the window with a mug of weak coffee and a stubborn frown. I'd always assumed he wrote musings or perhaps letters never sent. But now, seeing his neat cursive etched alongside titles like Winter 2023 and Accounts Final, I realized he had always been preparing something more. This one, I said, pulling a leather-bound volume from the shelf labeled December to January. My breath caught as I turned the first page. His writing was tighter than usual, deliberate. Each entry began with a date and a quote. January 2nd, let them underestimate her. That is their first mistake. We kept reading in silence. By the third entry, Edward had begun outlining his estate plans, not in the dry language of legalese, but as a father speaking directly to a child. He described the properties, the assets, the structure of the Monroe Foundation. Then, in the margin, in his unmistakable scrawl, the trust must be preserved through her. She has earned it, not through birthright, but through conscience. Wait, Talia said, holding out a second journal. Look at this cross-reference. She laid both books side by side. One journal marked a meeting date with Gregory, the estate lawyer, on January 4th. The other, half-filled, contained numbers, asset valuations, share splits, tax notations. It was technical, exacting. Then we reached the final page. There, centered and clean in ink darker than the rest. Codicil to my original will. January 4th, 2023. I hereby designate Elena Monroe as the sole and final heir of my estate, including controlling interest in the Monroe Foundation. Any prior amendments are void. Below that, Edward's signature. The ink had bled slightly into the paper fibers, but there was no mistaking its authenticity. He'd signed it, 3 days before his death. We stared at the page, speechless. The weight of what we held fell over us like fresh snow. This is it, I whispered. This is what they tried to hide. Talia slowly exhaled. It was never about their love, or his health. It was always about control. I turned the journal gently, searching for any evidence of submission. A receipt, a court stamp, anything to show it had been filed. Nothing, I muttered. No record of it ever being turned in. Because he never got the chance, Talia said, her voice low. He may have died before delivering it, or someone stopped it from reaching the court. A noise creaked outside the hallway. My breath hitched. We froze. Then came footsteps, slow, deliberate. They stopped just outside the doorway. Talia's eyes darted to the journal. She slid it into her coat. The doorknob turned. Gregory stood there, dressed impeccably as always, but the warmth he'd shown at the funeral was long gone. His gaze swept the room before settling on us. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. "This room is sealed under Diana's authority." Talia stepped forward. "We didn't touch anything beyond Edward's journals. And last I checked, he never ceded those to Diana." Gregory's smile was thin. "Intentions don't matter. Possession does. And unless you plan to explain to the board how you broke into a restricted wing..." I took a step forward. "You already know what we found. That's why you're here, isn't it?" His silence answered more than words could. Behind me, Talia's hand clenched tight around the hidden journal. We weren't safe yet. But for the first time, we held something real. And now, the countdown had begun. "Hand me that journal, Elena, or I'll call security." Gregory's voice was tight, his hand outstretched, eyes darting toward the nearby receptionist who had clearly overheard him. "Then call them," I said, gripping the old leather-bound codicil tighter. "Let's make this official." For a second, time held its breath. The tension in the Monroe Foundation lobby pressed in like thick velvet. Employees paused mid-step. One of the interns coughed nervously, pretending to read a plaque. Gregory's face darkened, but he didn't move. "You're making a mistake," he said, tone now lower and dangerously calm. "Noted," I replied. "Smile for the camera." I tapped the recording app already running on my phone and turned the screen toward him. "This interaction will go nicely with the other files we're preparing." His jaw clenched. "You think you're being clever, but if you submit that document and it turns out to be fake..." "It's not," I interrupted. He held my gaze for a beat longer, then turned and stalked away without another word. Talia was waiting for me upstairs, standing beside her desk with scanning equipment already set up. She didn't speak as I handed her the codicil. Her lips pressed into a flat line, she slipped on a pair of gloves and opened the first page. The paper was old but well-preserved. The ink faded in places but legible. Edward's looping signature graced the bottom of the second page, along with a date, January 8th. That was 2 days before the date Diana had claimed he signed his final version. Talia adjusted the lighting and began snapping high-res scans, then placed a verified copy of Edward's prior documents beside it. Side by side, the signatures matched. Curve for curve, pressure for pressure. "You sure?" I asked, heart pounding in my ears. She nodded. "If this is a forgery, it's one hell of a sophisticated one. But all signs point to it being real." "What about the witness line?" I leaned closer. "There's a partial signature. Smudged. almost like someone tried to remove it. She paused. But we can enhance it. Maybe even ID who signed. I slumped into the chair beside her, letting the journal rest on my lap like a relic of war. I could feel my grandfather's presence in every inked stroke. Talia continued scanning and logging metadata. We'll also need to cross-check this with hospital records. If Edward was mentally competent on January 8th and this is authenticated, we have grounds. I pulled out my phone. Daniel picked up after 2 rings. Tell me you have something, he said. I have Edward's handwriting, I replied. A codicil dated after the so-called final will. Talia's verifying now. He whistled. Game changer. I can get this into probate court as an emergency filing, but we'll need to argue risk of evidence being destroyed or suppressed, which, given Gregory's tantrum, shouldn't be hard. Already recorded him threatening to seize it, I said. Perfect. Send me the file. I'll prep our motion for an emergency hearing. After we hung up, Talia leaned back and stretched her neck. You're officially entering the war. I nodded, fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. The past week had taken me from being ghosted at my childhood home to pulling the trigger on legal retaliation. But the real war was just beginning. My phone buzzed. Unknown caller. I hesitated for a second before answering. Hello? Diana's voice coiled through the receiver like smoke. You're digging up ghosts, Elena. I stood silently, letting her words hang. She continued. Be careful what else you find. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a long second, the dial tone echoing in my ears. So this is how she plays. Not panic, not public threats. Just enough venom to remind me who I'm up against. And yet, something in her tone. Not fear, not anger, anticipation. I'll rise, the clerk called. Elena stood, her palms sweating, heart thudding against her ribs. Across the aisle, Diana adjusted her pearl necklace and smirked like she was walking into brunch, not a courtroom. The room buzzed with whispers, journalists scribbling, cameras stowed but ready. Judge Merton entered briskly, his robe trailing behind. Be seated, he said. The heavy wood creaked as everyone obeyed. Elena took her place at the plaintiff's table. Talia sat beside her, files open, posture straight. Daniel flanked them, whispering, Stay calm. Facts speak. Gregory rose first, theatrically brushing his jacket. Your Honor, we asked the court to dismiss this baseless claim. It was proof. Diana had funneled foundation money into a shadow account to quietly pay off Sabrina's mounting debts, the same debts she had later used to blackmail her into lying. The headlines came fast and merciless. Monroe matriarch accused of embezzlement, daughter's testimony shakes philanthropic empire. Sponsors pulled out within hours. The gala fundraiser was canceled. By evening, even the building's gold-lettered signage was stripped clean. At her townhouse, Sabrina sat with her therapist, hands cupped around herbal tea. I pawned my conscience for comfort, she said softly, and I never felt more empty. That night, she posted a public statement. I lied about my sister. I was manipulated, ashamed, and I've begun therapy to face what I did. The post went viral. Diana watched it alone in the dark. The fireplace flickered across her face, casting long shadows. She clicked the remote, but the video kept playing in her head. Sabrina crying. Elena silent but strong. Edward's voice from the video. My daughter will not win through deceit. With a slow breath, Diana turned back to the old letters and began shredding them one by one. Elena, meanwhile, sat in her modest apartment, sorting through the last of Edward's journals. Some pages were just sketches. Others were maps of memories. His favorite lake, his first job, the day she was born. There was sadness in his handwriting, but also peace. A knock at the door broke the stillness. She opened it to find a courier. He handed her a thick envelope bearing the county seal. She closed the door, heart thudding as she slid it open. Inside was the ruling. The court has determined that the codicil is valid and that Elena Monroe is the rightful heir to the Monroe Foundation assets and directives. She read it twice, tears threatening. Not for revenge, not for triumph, but for justice. Edward had trusted her. And now, finally, the world did too. I walked through the halls of the Monroe Foundation, not as an outcast, but as its legal director. The morning light streamed through the atrium windows just as it had the last time I was here. Except then, I was being escorted out by security. Now, board members nodded politely. Some even smiled. The weight of their politeness didn't escape me. It wasn't warmth. It was respect earned through fire. Talia stood by the main conference door, tablet in hand, already fielding calls from ethics auditors and donors eager to return. "You ready?" she asked with a smile that reached her eyes. I was, but not for what they expected. Inside, the boardroom buzzed. They offered me the CEO position unanimously. I declined it without hesitation. "I believe," I began, voice steady, "that the foundation needs a leader who isn't tainted by bloodlines. I've accepted the position of legal and ethics director. My focus will be ensuring what happened to me never happens to anyone else, here or elsewhere." The room went silent before the first round of applause broke out. Gregory, of course, was gone. Diana's chair sat empty. I wasted no time. We drafted a whistleblower protection policy, retroactively reviewed all major grants, and began investigating any conflict of interest cases. No more secrets in sealed envelopes. Not on my watch. Later that week, I drove with Linwood to Edward's grave. The sky was overcast, snow gently dusting the headstones. I knelt beside his and pulled the heirloom watch from my coat pocket. "You were right," I whispered. They began, but I finished. I placed the watch gently on the stone, the ticking barely audible in the wind. Linwood said nothing, only placing a hand on my shoulder before stepping back. In silence, we stood there, grief and victory intertwined. Back at the office, I found a letter waiting in my desk drawer. Handwriting I knew instantly. Edward's. "For when you've won," it read. I hesitated for a breath, then opened it. Inside was just one line. "Now go help the ones they forget." That afternoon, I launched a new initiative, the Inheritance Justice Program, designed to support those unjustly written out of their legacies due to coercion, manipulation, or neglect. Within days, we had our first applicants. The final surprise came in the form of a handwritten letter. From Sabrina. "I'm not ready to talk," it began. "But thank you for not becoming like her." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer beside Edward's, and closed it. For the first time in years, the silence around me felt like peace, not exile. The lights were softer this time. No stage-managed sparkle, no illusion of perfection, no clinking glasses over lies. Just the quiet hum of a heater, the crackling of firewood, and snow pressing against the windows in gentle silence. For the first time in a decade, Christmas didn't feel like a performance. Elena moved slowly through the Monroe estate, her footsteps muffled by thick rugs she once wasn't allowed to step on. A year ago, she'd stood at the same threshold trembling, erased, unwelcome, a ghost in her own lineage. Now, the house felt honest. Not warm, not forgiving, but true. Honest in its emptiness, its age, and the layers of stories it could no longer hide. Back then, someone had hissed, "This is not your home." Today, no one said anything. They didn't need to, because this wasn't about who spoke the loudest anymore. It was about who stayed, and who rebuilt. The dining table, once long enough to sit 20, now held a simple setting for 5. No name cards, no silver-tongued lawyers, no smug relatives in tailored blazers. Just survivors. Just family, chosen and earned. Talia placed a single white lily in a vase beside the bread basket, her fingers still marked by ink and clay. Linwood stirred gravy, humming off-key like he always did when he was nervous. Elena set the last fork down, pausing to align it perfectly, not because she cared about perfection, but because she finally could. There was a knock. She opened the door to see Sabrina, sober, clear-eyed, older somehow. There were no grand gestures, no embrace. Just a look, 1,000 memories, regrets, wounds, all held in a single breath. "I won't stay long," Sabrina said quietly. "I just needed to see it, one more time." Elena didn't answer. She stepped aside, letting her sister in. They walked the halls in silence, past the corner where Elena's childhood drawings used to hang before someone tore them down. Past the corridor where Edward had told bedtime stories with a flashlight under his chin. Past the mirror Sabrina once cracked in a fit of rage. In the study, a small envelope rested on the fireplace mantel. Edward's final letter. Elena picked it up, hands steady now. "I knew they'd try to erase you," he had written in faded ink. "That's why I left pieces of you everywhere. Photographs, journals, stories only we knew. I built this house with walls strong enough to hold grief, but open enough for hope. I never expected you to stay. I just wanted you to remember. You were never the one who needed their approval. You outgrew that long ago." The letter trembled in her grip, but her voice did not. She passed it to Sabrina, who took it with reverence. "Was he scared?" Sabrina whispered. "Yes," Elena said. "But not for himself, for us." Talia entered with candles. "We're lighting one for Edward," she said gently, "if you'd like to join." Sabrina nodded. They gathered in the dining room, the lights dimmed. Elena struck the match, lowering it to the wick. The flame flickered, then held. "For Edward," she said. "For what he protected," Linwood added. "For what he saw in us before we saw it in ourselves," Talia said softly. Silence, but not heavy, just full. Then, unexpectedly, Elena laughed. It began as a breath, a release, and bloomed into something real. Not polite, not defensive, just joy. Talia looked over, smiling. "What?" "Nothing," Elena said, wiping her eye. "It's just, I forgot I still could." They ate slowly. No phones, no speeches. Just real conversation, real food, and stories that no longer needed to be sanitized for someone else's comfort. After dessert, Sabrina lingered near the window, arms crossed. "I've been thinking," she said, voice steady. "I'm clean now, still rebuilding. But I've got this idea. A small shelter, maybe. For women like us, who weren't believed, who lost everything. Would you ever consider helping me start over?" Elena looked up from her tea. Her eyes softened, but her brow lifted with amused suspicion. "That depends," she said, slowly. "Do you still have the pawn shop receipt?" Sabrina blinked, then laughed. "A real one. Tired, but real. Still folded in my wallet." "Then maybe we start there." Outside, the snow fell heavier, but inside, the storm had passed. The Monroe estate was still old, still cracked. But it was honest now. The ghosts didn't haunt anymore. They watched quietly, knowing their stories were no longer the only ones that mattered. Elena gathered the plates, Talia humming beside her. Linwood poured the last of the wine. And for a moment, they weren't broken people trying to heal. They were whole, even if only for one night.